Living on the edge of the wilderness in Northwestern Ontario, I am blessed with a few things that I consider luxuries. One such pleasure that I seek out occasionally during our few short warmer months is to rise in the morning ahead of the sun, slip my canoe onto the glassy waters of our lake, and paddle out for a few marvelous hours of solitude. I say solitude because I love to paddle the lake alone, and often do. Occasionally I can convince my wife to come with me. Today, I invite you to join me for just a few minutes of the journey. Do come with me to one of my favorite early morning destinations. Now, before I raise your expectations too high, let me say this. We won't be seeing any majestic mountain ranges, or spectacular waterfalls, or mighty rivers. I'm just going to paddle you through the creek that runs between Little Jack and Big Jack. But to me, it's still a wonderful place to go alone early on a misty summer's morning, when many folks are still snug in their beds. To go and just sit there in my beat-up old canoe and let the songs of 1,000 birds wash over me as they welcome in the new day. So come with me and see what I see and hear what I hear. This creek isn't much, really. It's less than a quarter of a mile long, not very wide, not very deep. Just enough to easily navigate with a canoe. And this year the water is higher, due to the winter's good snowfall and heavy spring rains. So the beaver dam that I often might have to drag across is now totally gone, and I can paddle right through without stepping out of the canoe. Besides seeking a bit of solitude, another reason that I love to go for an early morning paddle is that many wild creatures are also active during these hours. I never know just who or what I might see out here. I don't always return with a pile of stunning photos, but I do always come home feeling that this was time well spent. I don't think I've ever actually seen loons in the creek, but it's certainly not uncommon to run into them in the bays on either end, or pretty much elsewhere on the lakes. I may well come across various ducks, alone or in families, either in the creek itself or in some sheltered bay or flying overhead. Canada geese are not uncommon to see in the spring or fall while they're migrating. And certainly there are lots of other birds to be seen, either aquatic or otherwise. The most hardy ones stay year-round, and others, like loons, just come for the summer. Still others, like many of the geese, they're just stopping by for a little rest and refueling as they pass through on their way north or south. I think otters are some of the coolest and most graceful creatures of the water. I never know when or where an otter might pop his head out and hiss at me. Of course, it would be rather unusual for me not to see a beaver or two, particularly on my way through the creek at this time of day, as there are several colonies around these lakes including one in the creek itself. I've watched on more than one occasion as a beaver meticulously carried up mud from the creek bottom and patted it onto his dam. One May a few years ago, I paddled to and through this creek on a couple of different nights so that I could photograph auroras over Big Jack. Canoeing through here at 2 in the morning is a real experience. On one moonless night, a granddaddy beaver was also out patrolling as I was paddling by. At one point he silently and unbeknownst to me surfaced right next to me there in the inky blackness, and being somewhat upset by my presence, he immediately slapped the water with his enormous tail and dove back under. Besides rocking my boat and causing my heart to skip a beat, he also succeeded in soaking me nicely. On one of those nights, I used an abandoned beaver house on Big Jack as a platform from which to view and shoot the auroras. And on another night, I simply launched my canoe into the reeds in the very shallow waters at the mouth of the creek and shot from there. So as not to rock the canoe while shooting these long exposures, I had to hold my breath and sit dead still, not even daring to swat a mosquito for fear of spoiling the shot. And being so close to the swamp, the calls of the peepers were nearly deafening. Hours later, when the auroras had played themselves out, I turned my canoe and paddled back through the creek in the darkness. But as I emerged out onto Little Jack, the nearly full moon was just rising over the bay, adding yet more depth to an already magical experience. There are plenty of other creatures that hang out here in or around the water, and I love to watch for them while I'm passing by. Some, such as insects and spiders, are so small that I really have to look carefully to even spot them. On these early morning trips, it's not unusual to find spiders and insects just clinging motionless to their webs or stems of grass, patiently waiting for the morning sun to warm them and dry them off. Speaking of spiders, despite the fact that most folks seem to hate them, some spiders weave the most fantastic work of art webs. And add to this our cool and dewy Canadian nights, and wow, when I paddle by in the early hours of dawn, I'm transfixed by the beauty. One such morning, I paddled onto the calm waters of Big Jack to find the rushes that grow in the shallow water at the creek's mouth covered with these delightfully dewy webs. The striking thing about these particular webs was that, as I inspected them more closely, I found that they not only rose above the water, but also extended below the water level. I had spent quite a bit of time totally engrossed in photographing these delicate wonders, sparkling in the morning sunshine, when I paused for just a moment to look up, and I noticed that my canoe was covered with spiders. All through the spring and summer, I might find all manner of wild plants and flowers displaying themselves along the creek. I consider many of them to be like old friends that I don't often get to visit. They're out there waiting to greet me warmly on a damp summer's morning. It's fun to imagine that they might be every bit as pleased to see me as I to see them. Because of this, I must make the effort each year to track them down and to appreciate them so as not to disappoint them. Even though the blue flag, like many others, chooses to dwell off in wild and secluded places, it exudes a certain confidence, a certain classiness. So much so that I suspect it might feel right at home in a tended garden as well. The fragrant water lily is another of the more showy aquatic flowers that I simply love. Wild calla is yet another of my favorites, and being only slightly less obvious, it is no less beautiful. Other flowers may be more inconspicuous and can be easily passed by without really noticing, but I still enjoy looking for them. Being the artistic type, I sometimes find beauty even in simple vegetation. I particularly like cattails and the other tall marsh grasses. And even dead and rotting leaves can possess a certain beauty. Canoeing on what are essentially liquid mirrors, I can't help but notice and fall in love with the many constantly changing reflections with which I find myself surrounded. A reflection on the water is like a skillfully crafted story, a story created by blending together elements of both fact and imagination. The resulting tale could end up being a near pristine rendition of reality, or it could be so altered, so rearranged that the reality part becomes indistinguishable, or it just could come out somewhere in between. I have come to welcome the randomness, the abstractness of the reflections that the water presents to me out here. I so love these slightly contorted but often stunning versions of the world. Nature paints exquisite pictures. Nature overflows with art, and this art begs to be noticed. Perhaps the most anticipated but fleeting moments of my early morning adventures are the moments around and during the actual sunrise. The sky, water, and landscape, they evolve, they transform from one instant to the next. Other than knowing that the sun will eventually appear above the trees, I'm never quite sure exactly what to expect. How much mist will there be to burn through? Will it be clear? Will there be a little bit of cloud? What colors? Who knows? But I am never disappointed. Well, now you know a little more about one of my favorite secret sanctuaries, and a little more about why I love to visit it from time to time. I hope you enjoyed the journey, and I'm so glad you came along. Well, hey, here we are at the other end of the creek already. I think I'm hearing something going on over to my left. Sounds to me like somebody's chewing on a tree. Let's go investigate. I don't see anyone yet. Maybe I'll just splash a little with my paddle to let him know that we're here.